All right, so we have one more panel session before we'll head to our break for the morning. And this is going to be about automating business and operational functions between ecosystem partners with LSO APIs, blockchain, and smart contracts. And moderating that panel, we have Grant Lenahan, who is the partner and principal analyst at Appledore Research Group. If I could welcome Grant on out, and he'll introduce his panel. Grant back there? All right. Do you need the clicker?
Yes, I do.
All right.
And this is advanced.
Yep.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Welcome. Is this, yeah, I think I can hear it working. I am Grant Lenahan from Appledore Research Group, but I am really just the moderator and instigator of a team of people who know a ton about various parts of automating behind these APIs. I'd like to introduce the team. Dan Wagner from CloudSmartz. Dan is the co-founder and CEO. I'd like to welcome Ari Banerjee, Senior Vice President of Netcracker Technologies. Jeff Quinn, Vice President of Sage Management. And Scott Melanson, Director of Digital Client Experience Group at Verizon. So I welcome the team. We can take our seats. And I just want to set a little bit of the stage because we've spent several days here talking about technology, talking about APIs, talking about ecosystems, talking about the difficulty of interconnecting one-to-one and then one-to-many, interoperability testing, then upgrading the functionality. And one of the really interesting discussions that I had early on with the previous panel that I was moderating was, why is it so hard to upgrade the APIs? And what it really comes down to is we're on a journey of getting one piece of the process automated and then adding more pieces of the process. And that's really, in many ways, the focus of the panel today. And let me see if I can actually move forward and see if the magic works. The magic does work. This is why we need to invest time, money, effort in automating and in building a more agile, more interconnected, richer ecosystem to play on the AT&T presentation earlier. This is some research we published about a year back, and we went grounds up to try and understand if we can do dynamic orchestration, if we can integrate bandwidth with overlay services like SD-WAN and security services like SASE and smart firewalls that are context and application aware, if we can do this globally and efficiently and give customers control and observability into their services that they'd really like. And when I say customers, I'm talking about medium to large enterprises. This is the added money that's available. It's like over $100 billion to the carrier industry globally, above what we would be expecting to get if we can get this right. And actually, if you look at it, that was with me making some somewhat conservative assumptions that we only get something like 40% of it as a service to the carriers, and an even bigger chunk being done DIY, sort of as it has traditionally been done. So my whole point is, there's money to be made, there's profit to be made. Yes, this is hard, but at least there's a return. And I just wanted to show one other, just to make the point, right? This is a point in time some years ago. We won't discuss the guilty, but if you wanted to order broadband connectivity to a remote site, on the left was sort of the Amazon view. And the Amazon view was pretty simple, intent-driven behind it in the cloud. The one on the right was a pretty typical, complex, high-available ASR process. And you can see there is magic that has to go on. And that magic is automation, processing intent, saying this is what the customer wants. What are my best options to do that, optimizing for cost and efficiency? And this is just to order, right? Then we need to settle. We need to have a contract. We need to, carry SLA information. And these are all the API pieces that I think ultimately we need to automate end to end if we want to get all of the money and get low costs, efficiency, and many of the things we've always been looking for. And what's great about this panel is the four gentlemen here have solutions that deal with different parts of that life cycle and that business process, and are going to give a little bit of an overview about what the problem is, what the solution is, and then I'm sure they'd be happy to take questions in some of the detailed areas that they each work. So with no more ado, I'm going to actually, if I can, go back to the list of names. Can I go back? There we go. And say welcome to the panel. And I'd like to, picking up on where we just were, we've been spending a lot of time talking about APIs. They're really just the exposure of automated processes. And in many cases, abstracted processes. So I can say, from here to here, give me 100 megabits with this SLA, go figure it out. Each one of your solutions deals with a piece of it. Who would like to begin talking a little bit about the challenges of implementing this automation and tell a little bit about how we can move that ball forward?
Yeah, I'll start.
Yeah, please.
So just to give you guys some context in terms of my role at Verizon, so I actually have the digital experience similar to what Stephanie was talking about earlier. I work in the Verizon business group, but I actually have a concentration and focus on our wholesale channel. So we've been after the last 5 years a digital experience transformation journey, and I think the last couple of speakers that have been up here, a lot of their dialogue has resonated very well with me. First of all, handling a lot of domestic level transactions, and you're talking about the ASR, I agree with Stephanie. We've actually leveraged that ASR process on the backside because our back office really hasn't changed. Could get into some questions on that a little bit ago. But we put that wrapper around it with the MEFs and TM forums, similar approach to make it easier to do business. And I think then Ben's comments around making sure that the content that's still inside these payloads is still what everyone understands to be the case, right? Because it's all great that we build these APIs and we're seeing it firsthand. So I'm feet on the ground, helping with the IT organizations to build this stuff. But the reality is we're hitting a lot of roadblocks around the stuff that Ben talked about. Addresses are coming in, they're falling on the floor. They think they want one product because it's categorized as one thing within their ecosystem, and it's not the same thing that we're talking about in our ecosystem. And you can put all you want effort into all these APIs, but if you're not passing the right traffic back on those payloads, nothing matters. So we're in the middle of trying to do that, and I think there's a lot more work that the MEF here can help and assist with, as long as some of the other group, but definitely that partnership that Ben talked about to kind of simplify this and make sure we're all talking about the same thing. Because we're all about trying to get connected together, as you said, and we're doing all the right things, but if that content that's being passed around isn't what we all think it's going to be, that's a problem. So that's what we've been trying to kind of deal with recently, because we've put the platforms in place now, and some of the fallout's really related to what folks have said earlier.
Interesting.
So I'm Dan Wagner from CloudSmartz. My orientation's a little bit different in that, I've been a telco guy. I started at Global Crossing for 14, 15 years, was the CIO there and ran the business services division. I popped over to XO, so I've lived this world for quite some time. But we started CloudSmartz about 10 years ago, and we do two things. We serve CSPs. We serve telcos. And we automate. We specifically automate. And some of the challenges that we see, we do two things. We're systems integrators, and we actually cut our teeth and started our company on automating NAS from beginning to end for a large Asian Australian company, and developed really one of the first programmable networks from soup to nuts, the entire bandwidth on demand process, from the customer experience down through automation, through open source controllers and so forth. So we've been around the industry and served a lot of customers that way. We also took a step back a couple of years ago and realized that there's an area that we don't talk about often in some of these forums, and that's really the area of customer experience. And we built some applications that enable the automation, which is what we're talking about, from the customer experience platform down through CPQ and down through service delivery and so forth. Taking a step back now and understanding the challenge, I think, in aggregate, especially as we see the small to medium-sized telcos, which is who we tend to serve, is where do you start? Especially as it relates to NAS, where do you start? It's a monumental effort, and if you look at most legacy environments of OSS, BSS that are out there, they are immense and complicated and legacy and old technology. So starting is imperative in beginning, and what are some of the ideas and how you deal with the legacy environments that are not really easy to work with. You think about potentially automating NAS in a different environment, where you consider a NAS nugget, if you will, of automation, where you could think about maybe your on-net services, and you can think about how do you automate across the stack, and how you can do that using APIs and implementing in a more of a proof of concept and MVP environment, and then building that nugget over time, possibly even integrating and orchestrating with data back into your legacy OSS systems and so forth, and possibly even putting an overlay of a customer experience platform over the top. And you can make progress pretty readily because you've isolated your tasks into something that's actually doable. I think NAS is amazing. It's a great aspirational topic. But I think the only way to succeed is probably to think big like NAS, but implement small through some of these different application layers.
So think globally and act locally.
Absolutely.
Ari, would you like to pick up on it?
Yeah, sure, thank you. As Ari Banerjee, I'm with Netcracker Technology, and just to give a brief backdrop of what we do, in fact, this is the 30th year of us in business. And we started off as a pure play inventory company way back, early 90s. And today we work with about 300 operators across the globe, pretty much seen it all across both BSS and OSS. And as we look into some of the pain points and the challenges, one of the things that we see very, very clearly is obviously there is a complexity around legacy. There's a complexity around older systems. That's how the business has developed over the period of last 30, 40 years. And now, in the last few years or so, there has been a transition in different things. One is around intent, right? How can you simplify and create intent-based automation? How do you do that in the right way? How do you hide the complexities of your overall service provisioning flow, fulfillment flow, but have the right intent in place, and then it flows downstream. It's complicated when you're looking at a very, very complex group level brownfield operator scenario where most of them are not really standards based. How do you create that automation? It's a challenge. We keep on it every day on a regular basis to keep our customers successful. The second is around, there used to be this large OSS transformation projects, soup to nut. Mm-hmm. Today, it's around automation of domains. How do you automate the right domain in the right way to make sure that when you try to get into something like a NAS or a partner-based ecosystem where you're bringing in all sorts of different other third parties involved, how do you make that work? And that is complicated, again, because, again, you have multi-vendor environment. You have legacy of network that goes beyond, you would think that, it's great, SD-WAN controller-based systems. It's really not. It's old systems which have been, I say, multi-country MPLS or VPN kind of a connectivity. It is still a very, very complicated scenarios where you have to manage SDNI system, non-SDNI systems, old legacy system, et cetera, et cetera. How do you make that happen? And the knowledge base and that has been created with our understanding of this industry for over 30 years, which kind of translates into knowledge graph, that goes into intent, which we also share when we look at how do we enable Gen AI-based solutions to be able to make some of these work items more and more effective, more automated. So I think there's a whole bunch of things that needs to happen before we get into this automating the business functions, automating the NAS. Let's be honest, this is the NAS 2.0 or maybe the 3.0. Mm-hmm. 2016, there was this whole thing around NAS which did not work for many reasons. Not that the enterprise customers did not need NAS, it's that they just chose SIs and other vendors to be their provider, not operators. This is the second time around, and hopefully with MEF, with other standard bodies, and with all the things that we're all doing, this time it will be successful.
Yeah, I mean, Reminds me of Arthur C. Clarke's quip that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. It's all the pieces to make that magic work. Jeff, I'd also like to throw this to you in particular to give a little indication of the challenges and the likely solutions for the front-end piece, getting contracts and agreements in place that allow this to progress. And on the back-end piece, either ensuring that the money flows or doing something about it when it flows incorrectly. And flip that over to you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So Jeff Quinn, Sage Management. Sage Management's been around for a couple of decades, providing wholesale audit services to wholesale carriers. Over the 20 or so years, we've delivered $4 billion in cost savings through optimization and funneling disputes from our wholesale clients back to their wholesale sellers. And I know Scott can speak to the experience from the AT&T side. It's an unfortunate part of the business. We've been a part of trying to improve things, if you will, from our client's perspective, but we really want to see things get to a future state where if you really have network as a service working, you then can't have the amount of resources and the amount of financial uncertainties that happen on the back end while you're trying to settle on bills, while you're trying to sort out whether or not SLA credits are due. So the way we see it is that we're going to work ourselves out of a job. Today, we make money helping clients stand up blockchain solutions, typically private solutions, to address some of the real-time order rating information. The SLA credit service that I want to talk about in a second is a part of this too. As we move all these things forward and blockchains become the single source of truth, and as you move everything to T0, you know, the time of the order or the time of the actual outage, and it's determined at that point, is there a credit due? What's going to be the rate for that circuit? That facilitates the elimination of the friction in the entire system. I know it's back office. We're not plugging in the stream of APIs. We're going to be leveraging APIs on the orders and the tickets and so on to make this happen. But specifically, I do want to mention the SLA reporting service, which is a service that MEF is going to begin offering effectively this week in a beta release. Sage is the underlying operator of both the software as a solution platform as well as the blockchain services that it sits on. And it's going to rely on intent, as we talked about, because part of the way the process works is we focus just initially on the SLA use case. We're going to get to other ones around rated ordering and inventory and whatnot. But on the SLA use case, what we do is we take the 20 years of experience that we have where, on behalf of our wholesale clients, we've looked at the trouble ticket activity and determined whether or not a credit was due. Now, you might think that we could be really, really aggressive and say, oh, the credit's due there, credit's due there. But you know what our clients say is if you embarrass me with my seller by giving me a dispute for a credit that's not valid, that doesn't help me. So we don't do that, right? So we've built an AI engine that reviews the ticket exchange between the technicians as they were resolving the outage and determining really what was the source of the outage. And that's the intent of that AI engine. And it will sit in the middle of this process that then relies on things like blockchain and a zero-knowledge technology that I'll talk a little bit more as we go on. But yeah, so we're going to leverage APIs to eliminate the back office. That's how we see it.
Interesting. Ari said something a moment ago that I think might be interesting for us all to comment on. He said, you know, we've done this before, right? 5, 6, 7 years ago, we, as an industry, NAS became a big buzzword, and a lot of people thought it was great and worked hard at it, and yet it didn't really take off. So maybe we could each pick 1 or 2 reasons that we think that was true and indicate what's changed, and if it hasn't changed, please call that out so that we identify that. Who'd like to begin?
I'll start. You know, that's such a true case. You know, we did our NAS project, it was even longer ago than 2016. And the challenges, the first challenge is it's really hard. It's heavy lifting. And the automation that's required is substantial. It transcends from, you know, your customer portal into your CPQ product engine to your service delivery function to your activation of online services. And at the time, a few years ago, there were a lot of upstart companies that were providing all this glorious open source controller capability. And that's not easy. That's not easy to actually automate from beginning to end. And I think Stephanie mentioned it. Even, you know, it's interesting if you can find a way to path through the entire NAS process. But if you can't repeat that and you don't really consider the service delivery capability and the challenges associated with that, as an example, you're going to have challenges. So we've also learned, I think, that at the time, a few years ago, the commercial case was kind of bouncing around as well, right? So bandwidth on demand, consumption, price-based consumption, and use as you need to use. We found early off with some of our clients when we were deploying NAS that often clients really didn't need to pay on demand. They would often turn up services and just leave it on. Yeah. You know, so there was a lot of discussion around the commercialization of it and whether it was really a viable commercial revenue accelerating product. And I think today, though, I think we've come so far from an application perspective, and part of it's by some of the work we've done here at MEF, is you begin to create an environment where we're all consolidating our thoughts and applications and technologies, and I think it's much more adaptable now because we have better standards, better APIs, and so forth.
Well, and I think the enterprise panel, was it yesterday, gave us some pretty strong feedback that, to what you're saying, that turning things on, turning things off short term is not really their goal. Their goal is getting the initial service quickly and then having a well-managed, well-integrated set of vertical services that can take trouble off of them. Yeah. But they probably are going to be long-lived services.
Yeah. Well, there's two aspects of this, right? One is that hopefully we've learned quite a bit from what's happened in the past, right? You get a hope for that. And I think, not to promote the Verizon kind of perspective, but you heard Debica talk about a set of bundles, right? I think we need to define kind of what is needed, right? I think it was like a solve all thing, like you said. Right. You think you need bandwidth on demand and you don't, right? So I think if we can, like anything in our business for years, right? If we can simplify what we're trying to do and define it pretty well, going back to Ben again about definition of what we're doing, I think that'll help a lot. I think we got into this, trying to move the needle, and when you're trying to chase that train down the track and it's going fast, it's never easy, right? So hopefully now we've learned a little bit from that train ride, and now we can kind of settle in and define some things a little bit better. Let's hope, anyways, right? Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like the more complicated you make it, the more you have to automate, and the harder and more expensive and slow the job becomes.
Absolutely.
Sure. Ari,
I think the other thing that we really saw in that phase, right? I'm calling this NAS 3.0, to be honest. I mean, I've seen 2 iterations fail before. Is around the whole complexity around partners.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Different business model, different consumption model, different licensing model, and how do you bring it all together? Because people's choice change, right? You're measuring your partners, especially if it's for enterprise customers. What the top 10 that has been consumed? Where are you getting the most amount of complaints from? How are you going to change it based on performances? Bring in new partners. But they're not standard-based in most cases, right? Mm-hmm. Onboarding, there's a sunk cost every single time. Yeah. Their licensing model is all very different. So you need somebody in the middle to be able to also broker the license management, make that happen. CPQ you talked about, absolutely, right? How do you bundle price, quote, and how do you manage the SLAs around your partner-centric services, and also onboarding. Now, today with MEF, with TM Forum, GSMA Camara, and others, right? They're trying to come out with partner onboarding mechanisms, which are standard-based, which are all of these. Are we there yet? We'll talk 24 months later to see if there's real money here or not. Today, not so much. Right. Long way to go.
Yeah, if I could just jump in too then on, why have things not progressed more over the last, 5+ years? I think there's, one part of it is the API adoption, and it, we saw the charts the other day from MEF, and it certainly looks like it's improving, and so that bodes well. Speaking from the back office perspective, understanding that this sort of shared source of truth between vendors that eliminates a lot of the back office financial frictions and so on. I think one of the challenges there is, blockchain's been, 5-6 years now probably, right? Yeah. And I think blockchain is a solution, I think the challenge has been that there was a trade-off between privacy and scalability that had to be made. In order to not risk exposing commercial terms, private is the way a lot of the larger carriers go, but private solutions are not scalable. You're not going to do it with every trading partner out there. You'll do it with a handful of your top trading partners. And that's because there wasn't a better technology solution. And so then just coming back to the SLA reporting service that we're providing, it's the MEF-SLA reporting service, and Sage is the operator behind it. What is unique in this is a technology that's been around for a long time called zero knowledge, and zero knowledge proofs being applied in the blockchain. And so the way that this works is that zero knowledge operates in an Ethereum virtual machine where the smart contract and all the details of an SLA ticket gets fed into that smart contract in this layer 2. The layer 2 is permissioned. If Scott and one of his trading partners are involved in that particular ticket, they can see their data on that permissioned environment, but nobody else can. But all the ticket information is in fact there running through the smart contract. And what the zero knowledge environment then does is it provides a proof that the smart contracts executed the way that they were supposed to. And what that provides is a carrier like Verizon or others to be able to see the trouble ticket, what our AI outcome identified as the reason for the trouble ticket, whether or not the two parties agree that the amount of credit that is due or is not due is agreed upon. You get a proof that the smart contract executed that correctly, and then the proof, which can't be interpreted into anything, it's just an obfuscated blob of data, gets written out to layer 1. So now anybody can see layer 1, but the only people who know what that means would be somebody like Verizon, who knows that proof goes to that smart contract, to that transaction, to that ticket, to that particular outcome. And that is new. This is a new technology. It didn't exist a year ago. It exists now, and I think that plays a role in why some of the back office hasn't moved forward until now.
Can I comment a little bit more too? So just kind of bringing all this stuff together in terms of the other speakers too, right? Known Radhika quite a bit, a long time. She worked at Verizon for a long time, known her for a bit, and her comments were spot on. And I think that the other thing that we've talked to Daniel about in some of the commercial meetings is that, the technology is there to use. And I think from a technologist, for everyone in the room, we get it. Yeah. The issue is do the finance teams get it? Does the legal teams get it? Not so much at times, right? They don't want to be pushing out, I think of Verizon, oh my God, you're going to automatically send those SLA credits out as part of a blockchain. The finance guys would go through the roof. The SLA is going out, right? So everyone's got to start, the other people within the ecosystem got to start to become more comfortable with how this is going. So I've said to Daniel many times, like, we're all these technical folks in a room, but do we need to bring in some other outsiders to provide some aspect on why do you feel that you couldn't overcome the roadblock that you would present to make this technology work, right? So I think that's another thing we need to be mindful of. I think Radhika brought it up in terms of what's causing us not to get there fast enough around some of these other things,
So I think we can also be unnecessarily negative, because there really are some big market changes that are driving new opportunity. I mean, public cloud is disrupting the way private networks have been built. Yeah. Digital ecosystems and supply chains are disrupting it. I mean, we saw one of the biggest industries, ANX, go this route, 20 years ago, in healthcare. So we're seeing bigger supply chains and the security threat. And I think every one of those is a revenue driver if we get this right. So just an optimistic view as opposed to, gee, we have a lot of troubles to overcome. But I particularly like what you were just saying, Scott, that we can be, as big companies, any big conservative company can be its own worst enemy by standing in the way of its own progress. Yeah. How have you been dealing with that? How do you fix it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, a lot like some of the companies out there, our technology groups are now much more integrated with our other ecosystems, our marketing product teams, our carrier management teams, our finance teams. So I think that making sure they're closer to the technology has made the partnership there. It's kind of like the ROI statement that, again, Radhika put up on the board. You got to have some ROI, otherwise you're not getting the capital to invest to make the changes necessary to do the work, right? So everyone's got to buy in, and I think that that's the key is getting, that's why I said it's a bigger ecosystem than us, the software development folks and network folks. It's so much bigger than that. We know we got to include other folks to make those decisions. You know what I mean? So
You know what's interesting on that front, the big guys versus the innovation, you know, what we're seeing often are some of the smaller telcos are really well positioned to make pretty substantial progress because they're not encumbered, quite frankly, with what the larger telcos are dealing with, right? They have environments where, from an automation standpoint, they could rapidly think about the customer first and think about how to automate that process. So we're seeing a lot of energy at that level. And, you know, and I mentioned that little NAS nugget. Well, when you're a small company, you can automate pretty effectively and pretty efficiently if you've got the right partners and if you've got the right agility and the right intent. And actually make some competitive impact to how they deal with the larger companies, right? And because smaller companies, honestly, mid-sized telcos have the same challenges as it relates to trying to sell services, accelerate revenue, decelerate costs, and so forth. So I think one of the interesting trends will be, does NAS actually happen in the mid-sized to small-sized telco environment first and most effectively?
Yeah. Ari?
On the same note, we have a customer in the Germany-Austria market who competes with the telcos, but it's not a telco. It's a value-added IT reseller, one of the largest in that market. And they, in fact, use NAS, and a customer of ours from the time, I'm talking about NAS 2.0. And they compete head-on with Deutsche Telekom, Vodafone, and others in those markets, and they are, in fact, the value-added IT reseller is the market leader. And they have evolved their NAS over a period of time to be able to provide those connectivity services, reselling services, business productivity applications and services through their portal, through their marketplace, to their SMB customers. They also have large enterprises, but mainly it's for SMB. And they have been able to grow and grow. One of the things they have done initially is that, the internal processes around the agility, adopting Agile and DevOps, and simplifying their overall portal to make it very simple for the SMBs who do not have a big CTO, CIO there, to make it simple for them to consume services, which are complicated services. And the layering of the website in a way that if you have a network engineer who's doing that, you can do more fine-tuning of it. But if you're not, and you really don't understand, your son who's in high school is dealing with it, he can order some of those services but make it simple for them. And they are a market leader in that market. They're called Beckley in that market. Check it out, it's like a medium-sized $5 billion company. And their market share is bigger than some of the larger operators in that particular market in SMB and IT.
So I think actually there's a sort of a trend here of what you're saying, which is focusing on NAS and exposing things to third parties is almost missing the point. What you need to do is automate and get efficient operations for your own internal use, and then basically expose them via an API. Is that sort of the approach that, would all of you like to comment on that, from the largest of the large to someone who helps smaller and everything in between?
Yeah, so listen, I think that's the crux of it, right? I really liked Stephanie's discussion today where she said, you have to start somewhere, right? Yeah. So, one of the approaches that you might consider is how do you serve customers, really, and coming back. And when you're smaller, you can kind of correlate that and make impact within your organization and your applications much quicker. So your ability to actually develop and deploy and think about your customer journeys and the customer experience you really want to deploy, you have to do that well, and you have to orient. I think Andrew was it yesterday talked about we all have to behave like cloud providers. Like that's our competition, right? It's not so much each other. It's going to be the cloud providers, the software, the customer experience-oriented people, the OTTs that are out there already that will clean our clock, right? So taking a step back, considering what our enterprise and small business customers really want and really want to buy and really want how they want to be served, we'll start to develop a value parameter around telcos that I don't know if we have right now. Like there needs to be more value than just the service. We got the service, right? We have stable bandwidth and all sorts of capabilities and services that are available out there that work. And we spent 100 years perfecting that, right? But the question is, do we really add value on top of that? And I go back to starting with the customer experience and figuring out what enterprises and small businesses really want and focusing on that. And then drive that chain through your service delivery process, through your activation, through your CPQ and product catalog engines, and make sure that you have impact there.
Yeah, and
Yeah, please, Jeff.
I'll just say too that, you know, as APIs, again, our back office is going to rely on the APIs, the exposure, you know, let companies do business among themselves, and then for the purposes of SLA crediting, you know, share the trouble tickets with us, or when we get to the ordering, let us get a copy of the orders as they go through. We'll help make sure they get rated at the right time. But also our platforms also have to recognize the fact that, you know, even though our SLA reporting service is built on MEF-113 API trouble tickets, there aren't that many carriers using that today. That's okay. Our software as a service platform will transform that. So we can take different API feeds that are not 113 and transform it. We can, if needed, take extracts from other platforms, ServiceNow, Salesforce, and the like, and incorporate all those in. But all this is also then building to the point where eventually then hopefully all those parties are using the MEF-113, and so that's the future we look for.
Scott, would you like to?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have too much more to add. I think it goes back to what I said earlier about just trying to simplify and bundle our stuff a little bit. You know, we're big, so we can serve quite a bit. We can throw thousands of people at stuff and call it managed in a service type of thing. We don't want to be in that business, right? That's not a business we want to be. So we got to simplify the process and try to get more automation in the backside again, just like we said earlier. So same stuff. I mean, no different really.
Listen, I want to just throw out one comment too about something Scott said earlier about, you know, bringing in finance and legal and making sure they get comfortable with these third-party platforms and so on, and that's spot on. I'm a little bit older than a lot of the people here, so for what it's worth, I remember having to take a class on what the internet was. Okay, so listen, I think we need to, you know, develop
Got a lot
some
of grade twos, I know what you're talking about.
So maybe what we need is some blockchain training and the like for some of the finance people. Maybe.
Yeah. In the few minutes that we've got left, are there any, what I'm going to call hidden icebergs, things that we haven't talked about on the panel, that we haven't talked about at the GNE, that you'd like to raise and just have the industry say, yeah, we should stop sweeping that under the table, or maybe bring it to our awareness?
Yeah. I think one of the things that we need to really talk about is security, right? In terms of whether it's a NAS offering or whether it's any sort of applications that we are providing, or even bringing GenAI, for example, for certain things in telecom, be it from a productivity standpoint, be it from you know, simplifying design to activate standpoint, or some of the mundane stuff that's needed from a fulfillment standpoint. That's an important area, because as we look into our customer base, the adoption of GenAI in different phases is happening. Whether they have fully gone live or not is a different story, but they're all looking at it very, very seriously. And the trouble or the challenge that is going to happen, and we are seeing some of that with the litigations, is none of these use cases can be just fulfilled by using your public LLM models. You got to bring in the telco data and the processes, which resides, by the way, in most of the BSS and OSS systems that we are providing. So how do you create a secured environment where a lot of these things are being utilized to provide the right information to the customers, but not pushed out to the public web so that there is a security leakage? How do you create the secured environment to use telco data and make sure that everything else is kind of hidden from the public web? So I think the intent, the understanding of that, bringing advanced analytics and AI into the mix, all of that, utilizing GenAI model, there is a bigger security concern around things which needs to be looked into more clearly. It's not just about this SD-WAN and SASE, of course, it's a small piece, but from a much broader standpoint, as we tend to go and adopt more of these type of public AI type of models that exist today. And there's a big appetite, as we see, from our customers to be able to embed them in their processes.
Yeah, I mean, there's two sides to the security opportunity. If anyone wants to comment, I mean, there's certainly making sure that we treat customer data, network data, proprietary data properly, particularly when it goes into processes like GenAI that can be sieves. But then there's the other side that, you know, all the reports say with security vulnerabilities and the sophistication
100%.
of them rising,
Yeah.
Cost aside, there aren't enough trained individuals in the world to deal with it, which to me sounds like a fantastic revenue opportunity if we can automate it, standardize them as products, and sell them.
I still think, you know, to talk a little bit about the iceberg question, the original here is I honestly think that we're still disproportionately focused on, certainly we're network, you know, that's what telco is.
That's
It's
what we
network,
do.
it's building networks. But the concept of becoming cloud providers has got to be a shift in focus to automation and software.
Yes.
And I think our industry at large hasn't really grasped what software means in our industry. To me, it's the function that layers on top of our networks that provides all the value add. So if we don't have kind of a commitment across the board to, and I mean in monetary terms, to invest equally in the software infrastructure, we're not going to be able to compete with the AWSs and the OTTs, because obviously they come from that orientation and so forth. So now I think part of that's historically because we're network guys, right? We build from the network, we start from the network, we design everything from the network up.
Yep.
And software is the value added later. And so until we have that kind of commitment, and we see it all the time with companies that would rather, you know, buy another, you know, lay some more fiber than automate their entire process. You know, until we kind of get that shift towards software away from just networking, I think we're going to be challenged.
Yeah, I'll give you a little insight. We got some survey results back on some NPS surveys we sent out recently, right? And we've spent the last 5 years building out a platform for digital experience to kind of, you know, get rid of that friction in the CPQ arena, everything from, you know, quote to order to service assurance. And what's interesting, being in the thick of it, you know, now we're starting to see situations where we're getting feedback on the fact that we're getting bogged down by a contract or a reprice. And so what's interesting is when everything kind of goes through the channel, you know, in its journey the right way, on a sunny day scenario, it's all great. But how often are we now running around when we're just doing one-offs to kind of win business, right? And the problem is those systems are not ready to kind of take that on. So we're falling off the rails. You know, terms and conditions for that particular circuit needs a better SLA than what we normally have in our contract to get in with that product. Have to readjust another PROC amendment. That takes time. A reprice of it that maybe isn't in our tables, our rate tables. We got to reprice it. And now they're saying that you're all great when everything's sunny. When it's a rainy day scenario, which by the way, I'm coming to you often because it's not always sunny every day, right? We don't do well with that. So I think that we're going to have to spend time within my digital ecosystem to manage the one-offs, fall off the rails, and get it back on the rails quickly as possible, because we don't do a good job of that. And that's one that I'm starting to see, just a little bit of tidbit information. Yeah.
Into your simplification, maybe minimize the one-offs.
Yeah, and look, you can do it all you want, and this is the other thing, right? It's like, you know, trying to simplify what's going on, you know, having products that you can define. But the reality is that when the sales guy's going out there and selling something, those darn sales guys, they're selling something that's always something not quite what we said we were going to sell, and then we're trying to pick up it. I always say this solution, you know, please don't do that, because now I can't get it through my systems to get it billed properly. Otherwise, we're getting disputes on the backside. It's a nightmare. So the one-offs are becoming more and more prevalent for sure, you know.
But moving all that as close to T0 as possible. And that, yeah, I think that's, again, elimination of friction and getting to T0.
Ari, would you like to add anything to this in the last few moments that we have?
Yeah, I think the bigger challenge that we tend to see also is around the bigger business model thing, right? We talk technology, but there is also the bigger business model in terms of when we look at NAS as well as some of these services. I think I'm bringing it back to that where we started off, is that hopefully this time it's more and more successful, and the only way to do that is to be able to provide a more curated, broader experience to the end consumers, be it your enterprise or your SMB. Most of the first generation of NAS, et cetera, beyond the challenges that we all talked about, right? The API challenges, security, your rainy day scenario and all that, failed because the experience that was provided, the end customer experience, wasn't good enough. And that's fundamental, right? All the technology problem, we love to do that because we are telcos and we are suppliers to telcos and network guys. End of the day, most of these fail because consumers, enterprises, whoever, they look at somebody else and says, these guys are providing me a much better experience. I don't care what you guys are talking about, all these layer 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, I don't give a shit. I really want a consistent user experience that I can go in and simple for me, and I need what I need, right? And that's the fundamental discussion typically that we tend to miss out on because we focus on technology.
Well, I'd like to thank the panel for a lot of expertise, a lot of good discussion. Correct me if I'm wrong, I think we have a few minutes and can take questions if there are questions out there. And if there are, please wave your hands, because with the stage lights, we can't see anything.
There's one there in the middle. Right there, hands up in the middle. Can't hear you.
Can you
guys.
speak
Can't
up,
hear you.
please?
Yeah.
We're going to have to start again. So there were two statements made. One was made that said that telcos need to become more like cloud providers in terms of our thinking. There was another statement that was made that was, our ability to support one-offs needs to be slicker. Now, cloud providers don't support one-offs. That's why their business model is so good. So how do we kind of, we've got to take a position one way or the other on that. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think we have to evolve. I mean, look, I've been in this story quite a long time, like a lot of you folks, and the reality is if I write a book, right, it'd be like, you think when you want to have everyone do things the standard way, right, in the right way, and if you go walk around there, you can push as much as you want that thing, when push comes to shove, I got to go back to sales guys. When revenue hits the door, you're going to do whatever you need to do. And so I don't know what the right answer is completely, but you need to deal with that stuff and evolve. And so this is kind of back to the point before, like we've kind of only sort of trying to get good at the sunny day scenarios at the moment, and we haven't even really accomplished the rainy days. And so to move to new technology and everything else on top of that, it's really difficult. But you got to find a mechanism to deal with the one-offs. It's reality in my mind. Yeah. This world we live in doesn't live on a perfect world, right? For anything we do, right? So you got to figure out how to evolve your life when things happen in general, right? Same thing with systems and everything else that goes along with it. You know what I mean?
I think part of the answer comes with how to behave like cloud providers. Cloud providers are fundamentally software oriented, right? So they view their data in a very flexible way.
Yeah.
Not to say, and they also demand automation, as you're saying, right? I mean, you have to follow the process and so forth, so on and so forth. So, there's that balance between that. I did enterprise sales too, so I was always battling the network guys in terms of one-offs, because you take one-offs, you need revenue, right?
You need revenue, yeah.
But software applied in the right way and good data and analytics and flexibility around that entire environment can enable you to do things both ways. I mean, we need to be flexible to enable the one-offs, which are a lion's share of your flywheel business, and we need to be able to correlate that to have more of your one-off type solutions that you have as well. So I'm back to I think it's more software, more analytics on data, and more investment, quite honestly, in that layer will enable flexibility. And we're used to being network guys, and we don't do that.
And I think for me, it's always been about getting it back on the flywheel, right?
Yeah.
So, because when it comes off, if you're dealing with it manual all the way through, it's just nothing but a headache, right? So it's figuring out that mechanism to get it back on the flywheel and let the rest of the processes that follow through that journey to get done, right? Otherwise, you're just chasing it the whole way. It's like, hey, we're doing stuff now, don't get me started, around like, an order that doesn't come in, then it's got to get to provisioning. How are they going to get to provisioning? They're calling a provisioning group to do, TL1 commands on a switch. It's like, really? Like, that's not scalable, right? So you got to get it back on the journey, on the train, and let it continue on its path. Otherwise, you're in deep trouble.
And somewhere down the road, that's going to become a revenue assurance problem because because it didn't follow the process.
Did it bill on, it didn't complete a provision. You're giving me a bill that was 1 month later, all other stuff associated with it.
I think the other thing, obviously the one-offs, what drives that is either a customer who's got a unique use case that wasn't expected in the product development, or the product development isn't keeping up with the marketplace, right? It could be kind of either one of those things. Yep. The unique use case might be always difficult to get in front of, but you can imagine leveraging the APIs and automation that we're all talking about and shortening the product development life cycle will help in time. I don't think there's a silver bullet here.
No silver bullet.
Well, I think to Dan's point, I think what everyone seems to be converging on is we're going to have to deal with more customization than the automation does today, but somehow we need to get that level of flexibility into the automation so that we can.
Right.
And to Ari's point, what that may really mean is understanding the 80-20 rule of our customers' needs better so that we can build in at least most of them, if not every one of them.
Yep.
It's just trying to put a little bit of a wrapper around this, since I
Another
think
question left.
we have one more question at least. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. I can't see anything. Oh, hi.
Joanne.
Just realized who it was.
A question, or it's more of a comment. A lot of discussion has been on the APIs and things like that, but nobody has really addressed the big elephant in the room, which is that for the last 30 years, we've had our TMN model doing product is equal to service is equal to resource, and everything is our BSS. As long as we have everything in our BSS, then we know where everything goes, blah, blah, blah. But with virtualization and things moving around, nobody's really talked about decoupling the IT system to actually leverage the network as a service capabilities being exposed from the network, right?
Yeah.
And you need to decouple that. You have to remove the knowledge of how things are being provisioned down at the network level, such that you can now take advantage of your network exposure. The network has to know the service and do the apply of a closed loop and understand how to do that end-to-end and expose that. And nobody's really talking about changing the TMN model that we have today, because without doing that, you're just putting lipstick on a pig, because it's not changing. We're not changing things, and we're not going faster. So, this is a project that we...
Yeah, I agree with it, and that's why I made comments about a recognition that from within Verizon that our IT groups and systems actually need to be part of our network organization. As a matter of fact, we've actually made some organizational changes over the last several years to kind of integrate those two teams together. I think that we recognize that. Are we where we need to be, and collectively as an industry, are we where we need to be? No, but I think that you're hitting on something that I think that companies understand. They're trying to evolve to that, and we'll see how long it takes to get there. But no, you bring up a good point.
I think it's interesting. For decades, as you said, we've built these big monolithic systems that really just reflect the network itself. Right, that are driven from a piece of network equipment and the construction of the network up, and we've built these monolithic processes that are on that. Virtualization, the whole impact of that is to create microservices in a completely different way, in a more object-oriented way to think about it. That flexibility, to me, it can only happen through that software layer and that commitment and focus to that software layer and going to modern technologies and so forth. The iceberg back is still, most OSS, BSSs are stuck in that world. Let's face it, a lot of applications that we're dealing with in the telco world were built 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago.
And the other one more comment, Ari, if you don't mind. And the other thing too is that what I'm seeing, so we actually have a technology group in network that's worrying about some of that stuff, and they're the group that has to be there because they understand the network better than the BSS guys, right? So they have to be there. Unfortunately, they're not in the same room as our BSS guys. And so what's happening is we're providing all these capabilities with like our network, I call it like our network IT organization, and then in the end, it's still going to come back and bill, right? So somehow that has to get stitched together, to your point. But both those teams need to be talking together, and we understand it. We're just not quite there yet. We put the teams together, but they still are living in two different silos organizationally, kind of thing. They need to be very integrated. You bring up a really good point.
I would just add on, obviously when we talk about 30 years, 40 years in the business, the evaluation or the evolution of the business happens as well, right? Which used to be more monolithic, more one-off, different silos of different services the operators have launched in the past, versus now focus on overall digital transformation for customer experience. A lot of the transformation programs in the last 2.5 years that we are dealing with are not focused on so much around piecemeal stuff, but it's more around the broader customer experience. So, and they're bringing, in many cases, bringing in chief digital officers, chief customer officers, who are running some of these big programs. Many of them don't come from telco. They have other experience where they understand customer experience a little bit better than the telcos have in the past. So for them, it's more about top-down, customer and then down, and how can you provide the most optimal customer experience. Does the standards need to change? Probably. But none of the large operators or the people running large transformations are waiting for standards to mature before they embark or jump onto these bandwagons. So the focus has changed. It's not about having 30 different billing and OSS platforms for 30 different services, or those silos that we have. It's more about consolidation. It's more about transformation. As we see the operator community consolidating, so is their vision around how they can bring a converged experience both for the enterprise customers as well as for the consumers. So, and obviously with that we have to evolve, right? What used to be a platform going back 30 years is now cloud native microservices based. We pretty much work with pretty much all the hyperscalers out there because a lot of the deployments today are not on private cloud. A lot of these transformation deployments are on public cloud in a secured way, be it AWS, be it Google Cloud, be it Azure, and nowadays it's Oracle Cloud in certain instances. So,
I mean, if I can interject one thought, you mentioned microservices, and it's often thought of as a software tool and a technology thing, and yet, if we think about microservices and service-oriented as a way of building our products and our services, the things that we ultimately sell, we can begin to crack the nut of how do we allow for a rich set of options and yet have reuse and automation. It's partly how we get to Scott's dilemma, right?
Yep.
By building them so that you can call up and configure the services that compose ultimately what the customer was looking for, and nothing's a one-off.
Yeah.
It's a one-off combination.
It's a reusability concept, obviously, right? You want zero downtime. You want active. You want all of these
you
things.
need to get there.
Yeah.
And there are trailblazers. There are operators who are thinking that way. Yeah.
Our timers in the back will let us know, but I believe we have come to the end of our time. So I want to thank everybody for being a great interactive audience. I want to thank the panel.
Thank you.
And covered a lot of ground. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yep.